To tell us what moves have been happening under the hood, Gemma Dale from nabtrade joins us live in studio. Gemma, good afternoon.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty well, thank you. Curious to get your thoughts on volumes, because when we were in the sort of North American summer season, we were talking about these really anemic volumes, but have we seen any shift in activity levels?
We saw this huge volume of traffic coming through during reporting season. So all of the news coming out, people were waiting for some clarity on so many different things, so many different areas, and they really started to move during reporting season. So we saw really massive volumes. They doubled off some of the lows, which was extraordinary. That's coming off the back of March and April though, when they were triple. So that was kind of amazing. So they were triple, sort of fell back to double, fell way back down to sort of January, February levels. They were back up during reporting seasons. They're coming off again. There is not a great deal of news. A lot of our investors are waiting for news in order to move. So you've got traders who are really active on a daily basis, and you've got another group who are like, I'm not doing anything unless there's a really meaningful reason for me to move my money around. And at the moment, they're seeing maybe a little bit of news each day, but not enough for them to be really actively trading their portfolios.
Okay.
So it's a little bit quieter than it was.
Right, okay. There were big volumes though in Fortescue yesterday. So what was the news associated with that? Is it just coming down to iron ore prices, you think?
Pretty much that. So Fortescue is really interesting to us in that it's a really, really high conviction stock. It's not widely held across the portfolio. The people who do hold it love it to pieces. So they are really big holders. When they trade meaningfully. So 75% of the volume yesterday was in trade sizes over $100,000.
Oh, really?
For a retail broker, that's a really significant amount. That's people moving big chunks of money around, or people with big chunks to move around, either way you look at it. It was a 77% sell. So a lot of people were a little bit nervous. Sorry, it was a buy. It was BHP that was a sell. So it was quite interesting which ones they were moving. So Fortescue, they sort of like to buy it on weakness because they do love that stock. They're really keen on it. BHP, so both the same sector, roughly iron ore prices were the big news. BHP, they're like, I'm happy to let that go, but I'll keep my Fortescue. That's the one that I like. And so we saw very, very high volumes there. That was the one they were keen on, but they were letting BHP go. But that was on Wednesday.
Yeah, interesting, because we did have data from China that was quite strong this week. But I've spoken with a lot of people that sort of say fade the rally into Fortescue Metals. But yeah, you know, it's an independent decision, isn't it? Okay, so I was speaking with a gentleman earlier today who was saying, look, the smart money's been made when it comes to CSL and ResMeds and all of those names. What are you guys seeing on the platform?
So CSL is also one of our very high conviction stocks. Only 10% of our investors hold it. So it's a really small proportion for Australia's largest company.
I've heard that before, which is always surprising, that there's not actually a lot of retail money in CSL.
Those who
relatively
hold it,
speaking.
Yeah, so those who hold it love it to pieces, right? Again, really, really high conviction, but there's very few who hold it. And those who have held it for a really long time. They were buying it at $10 and $15, and why would you let it go? Sometimes the reason it's such an enormous proportion of their portfolio is because they bought it at such a tiny price, and it's been the growth that has allowed them to accrue that very significant position in many cases. But it's very interesting to see where they will move in and out of it. So it was actually very large trades, sort of multi-million-dollar trades that we saw in CSL. $290 was the amount that they wanted to get out at. So that was the average price, and it was a big sell at that price. That's quite astonishing to watch for us. So very large number of getting out at that. We saw a lot of buying at 270. We see mixed trading at 280, getting out at 290.
Right, okay. So we had that profit warning that I alluded to coming from Macquarie earlier in the week. Did that move the needle at all?
That one's also, so these are the three stocks that we have that are very high conviction. CSL, Macquarie and Fortescue. They're the ones that are very tightly held, really small group, very, very committed one way or the other. What was interesting was it was actually quite mixed trading among our big investors. So the ones who've held it for a long time have very big positions. They weren't sure. There wasn't a really clear trend, but we saw a lot of buying from smaller investors. So they saw it as an opportunity to get in when it was sold off a little bit, but the people who've held it for a long time and have larger positions, they weren't quite so sure. We didn't see the big moves there.
That's interesting, because again, that day it was okay. I think it was down maybe 4%. It was okay. Is this a buying opportunity? And there's lots of people saying yes, it was. So we've had a lot of copy written about brain chip, about some of those, you know, smaller companies, but that generate a lot of headlines, and then you throw the buy now, pay laters in that space as well. So what have you been seeing in that area?
So Zip is still our buy now, pay later that everyone's mad about. That's really interesting. So Afterpay's fallen away. It's a buy and hold for a lot of our investors. They've been in it for several years now. They've done incredibly well out of it. It's sort of a core part of many people's portfolio. It's in our top 10, which is kind of astonishing for something that
didn't exist. Yeah.
Tiny many years ago. So that's quite interesting. It doesn't get the same kind of trading activity unless there's news. Zip, on the other hand, a lot of activity, which is really fascinating. We had investors buying it up to $10 and then back at $6. It's really moving around a lot. So that's one that they're trading in and out of quite actively. We still see it in our top 5, which is amazing.
It is the top followed company on Ausbiz platforms right now as well.
There you go.
Knocking out Afterpay and knocking out CSL.
There you go. So there you
Fun
are.
fact.
It's the one that is obviously most interesting to people for a variety of reasons. BrainChip has gone from nobody's ever heard of it to unbelievable amounts of buying early in the news. It's become a trading stock, which is really interesting. So a relatively small number of accounts moving really, really actively. So there's a larger number of trades than number of accounts who are trading it. Okay. That is quite fascinating. It was in the top 5 a few days this week, so it has clearly captured the attention of a handful of people, and they're quite keen to keep moving in and out. Mesoblast is in and out too. That's one that keeps popping up. So that's sort of in our spec group, the one that sort of, and it's been coming up for years in the speculative buys. It's the one that people love to keep looking at when there's a bit of news and they think that things are going to go well. They're in and out.
Novanix. We spoke with Novanix this week. What's the story there?
It's back in the numbers. I wouldn't be surprised if people had seen a little bit of news about it, seen it on Ausbiz, and so then suddenly it's back in people's attention. They take an opportunity to get in and out again. But it's not one we see frequently. It's not often in our group. So it's quite interesting to see what the small names are as they come up and how long they stay there. Zip's the one that has actually stayed there for a meaningful period of time. It's been there for about 2 years now. The others are just sort of, they come in waves depending on what's happening.
That's so interesting. Okay. And if we look at broader, you know, beyond the Australian borders. Look, we've talked a lot of Snowflake this week. Clearly, it's early days. Only second day of trading yesterday. Tesla, Nikola, Kodak. I mean, are these sort of still on the radar? Don't laugh at Kodak. Actually, you know.
So here's the thing. So Tesla's still our number one. It has been number one for so long. Every week, Tesla, Tesla, Tesla. It's always the most traded stock, which is fascinating. A lot of our investors have done incredibly well out of it. So you certainly can't criticize the decision to be part of that story. So they've done terribly well. It obviously came off really heavily, but it bounced back. It's kind of amazing. So it's still the number one most traded. It's not always buys, which is interesting. You mentioned Kodak. So Kodak was a big buy earlier in the year when it got absolutely hammered. It was investigated when there was the bounce, right? So the investigation's been ongoing and they were found to have done nothing wrong, theoretically speaking, all okay, bounced 25%, suddenly back in our stories. So clearly investors, a lot of them were taking profits though. So those who'd been buying it back when it was absolutely smashed to pieces, 25% bounce, lovely time to get out, and they've done quite well.
Thank you very much. Do you know much about demographics when it comes to any of those narratives, or not really? We
know quite a bit. It depends on what the stock is. So sometimes they're very small volumes or very small numbers of accounts. We've been talking about demographics all year because this Robin Hood story has kind of captured people's attention, and we looked very closely at our book and we had conversations with ASIC and all that kind of stuff to go, are we seeing young people and inexperienced investors punting away their life savings? There were stories about people punting away their superannuation and, you know, quite nerve-wracking stories and things that would make you very, very uncomfortable if you saw it. We didn't see anything like that. So we saw huge numbers of new investors, which was not surprising. And we saw, you know, a 5-fold increase in new applications in March. We saw a 300% increase in April. It was amazing the number of people who wanted to buy shares for the first time. The top 5 most traded things, Big 4 banks, ASX 200 ETF.
Okay.
So we just didn't see crazy stuff. People were really conservative. It was like the kind of advice you get from your mum. It was amazing.
All right, Gemma, have a good weekend. Thank you for joining us as usual.
You too.
We'll speak next week.